Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so we were talking last time about if the oven was lit with straw or stubble, things like this, hay. So those things, are more low intensity fire. So therefore, we're more lenient about it. That you're allowed to use it even if it's not raked out, the coals, whatever the hay. So it's brought down the Mishnah that we just brought. Katav Rambam Pek Gimel says Bit Yosef. Rambam says, Shem hisiko biglale behema. What about if he used instead of using that stuff, he used animal feces. So daka dino kesik bakash. So he says the same thing. The same rule applies like as if he did it with hay. Mashma de biglale behema kasa arehem ketzim. So it depends, right? Are we talking about small animals or big animals? The smaller ones are like hay. The bigger ones implies that it's like wood. Miu b'Yushalmi, however, in Yushalmi per kira aminan ifcha diglale behema taka. Yushalmi says the opposite. That when it comes to the big animals, they're like the olive pits that seem or wood, the glale behema, the gasa and kakash. But the big animals, they're more like the straw. ואולי נוסחת הירושלמי שלו הייתה מוחלפת משלנו. So it could be that his Yerushalmi was the opposite of ours. Okay. The inverse. Tanya בגמרא שתי קירות מתאימות, כלומר, so it says in Gemara Braita, למד זין עמוד א', what about if you have two stoves, right, and they're parallel to each other? כלומר, שהן מחוברות יחד. So what does that mean? They're like connected to each other. So in between them, there is like a wall made out of clay. So one is raked out. The other one is not. So you are allowed to put the pots on top of the one that's raked out, even though he's adding this kind of a setup adds heat. From the one, in other words, the one which is next to it gives it more heat. So nevertheless, regardless, we still say it's allowed. Okay. Let's move on. So, but so on the other hand, right, said the Torah, when it comes to ovens, right, which are hotter, even if it was lit with straw and hay, still it's going to be forbidden. So it says with Yosef regarding that, Mishnah Sham, it's a Mishnah there, Lamed Chet Amud Bet, Umfaresh Bebraita, and explains in the Braita there, then Samchin Lo, that we don't put something next to it. And all the more so we can't put on top of it. All the more so not inside. Three different levels, right? One is on the side, one is on the top, which is higher level, higher intensity. And then you have on the inside, which is the highest. So he says, right, that they're all forbidden. It says in Agad Mordechai, Pei Amud Aleph, Miu im en hayad soledet bo, but he says, you know what? If the oven is not so hot that the hand will be right, the hand will have to be removed from it because of the heat. Sheno cham kol kach, it's not so hot. Nireh de mutar. So he says, then it will be allowed. That's interesting. Oh. So what do you see from there? That if the oven is done on a very low temperature and it's not so hot to touch, it's not too hot to touch. So if that's the case, then it's allowed, he says. So this is very important to know if this is halakha. You know why? Because it looks like it is.
But if it's not Yatzoletbo?
Right.
Okay.
So this is very important because, that would mean, because I get questions like this all the time, about ovens. Are we allowed to put the food in the oven before Shabbat, blah, blah, blah. So apparently, right, we see from here that if the oven is not so hot, it's okay. So what does that mean? What is the temperature? Right, we're talking about 45 centigrade. Once it gets to 45, it's already yatzoledetbo. So if it's lower than that, you could store some food in there for Shabbat. Keep it hot. According to this, right? We're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch if that's the halacha, but it seems like it is. Let's see. We'll see. I remember one time in Israel, I bought an oven. And, in Israel, they have like European models, not the American models. So I bought like a French oven, which is known to be like very, very good. The best out there. So they had this like Shabbat mode on it, on this oven, Shabbat mode. So apparently, right, if I remember correctly, that's what it was. They were saying that the temperature is relatively low. So, you can't really, that's one thing, right? The other thing is also there's no way to adjust the temperature. It locks in the temperature, on a very low level. So it tells you right on the manual there, that oven, you can use it for Shabbat. Oh, thank you. Right, right from right, kosher oven from France. Right? Okay. Anyway, I think that's what it was. Yeah, so I think we were using it for a while, for that purpose. For warming. So it's like a plata, but a little bit more civilized. Right, a little bit more tame.
Being an oven, it provides insulation, right?
I'm sorry?
Being that it's an oven, it provides insulation.
Oh. Now you got me into a big hole here.
Well, a
What I mean to
plata
say,
just forms from the bottom, right?
what I mean to say is that what do you call it? The truth is, that the chapter on insulation comes afterwards. So we're gonna get to that insulation, but just to give you like a little teaser here, regarding that, putting something in an oven is not called insulation.
But I
That's
didn't
not
mean
that's
halachically
not what
insulation. I'm
insulation
just
means.
saying by putting it in the oven, you've got heat being contained in one space as opposed to just heating from the
Right, but
bottom.
halakhically speaking, we don't call that insulation. You know what I mean?
I understand.
Uh, okay. So anyway, um, yeah, we're gonna talk about insulation. I'm not exactly sure you were asking about that or something else. I'm not really sure what your question is,
No,
but
I just meant that like the mechanism of the oven is different from a plata.
yeah, of course, because it's being warmed on all sides.
Right, that's what I mean.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. It's more efficient. It's more of a natural way. So it's better it's superior in a way, more gentle. More even. Okay, whatever. Anyway, we're gonna talk about that later on, but so yeah, apparently according to this, it's okay, if you have something like that. So 45 centigrade, how much is that in Fahrenheit? Yeah. In the old days, I was in Israel. I didn't care about Fahrenheit.
It's not very much in Fahrenheit. So 45 centigrade is only like 112, 113 something.
Okay. I'm
It's
just
slightly
yeah.
warmer than body temperature.
Right, 113. That's what it says in Google. Google says 113. So, because I need to know this, just for
These
yeah.
days the temperature outside gets to that.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I don't know.
So
It's starting to here as well.
right. We had 100 this year.
Wow.
So anyway, yeah, so that would mean, right, if you put the oven on 100, it would be okay. Pretty much, more or
How
less,
many
right?
ovens can they be put on 100?
I don't know. I don't know. You have to check on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can put it on 100.
Right. It could be.
What
Could
I
be.
do is I turn my oven off and I just let whatever's in there just stay
Right.
warm about meal.
Right. So for your information, by the way, I have friends who ask me about this all the time. What they want to do is cook the food, and then put it in the oven, and you remove it, and then the question is, can you put it back? So here's the thing, right? Taking it out is not really so bad. Nothing wrong with that. Some rabbis don't like to allow this. They have all kinds of issues with this, but the truth is there's nothing wrong with it. So if you put it before Shabbat, right, let's say, you can remove it. If it's fully cooked, you want to eat it now, right? That's it. No problem. Just take it out and eat, even though the oven is on. There's no problem with that. The problem starts where you want to put it back in there, because you want to cook it more or whatever it is. I don't know. God knows, whatever it is. You want to warm it more. Right? Cooking obviously is not allowed, but warming it more. Let's say, right? You want to warm it more. So there, I tell them, you can't do that with the oven. You can't put it back. That's the thing. So it comes here, right? The Bet Yosef and tells you that putting it in the oven when it's not so hot is okay, right? As we said. So what does that mean? You're leaving it there, like, But here, really, it's not really talking about returning it into the oven, So we're gonna have to right, maybe deal with that later. But here he's talking about just leaving it there like that. But it's talking about a particular case. What are we talking about? That the food is, like more than 1/3 cooked. It's not raw, right? So the question is, can you put it in there? And the answer is no. But if it's not yatzolet was, then you're allowed to. That's what we're saying. Okay, let's continue. Even if it's it's raked out, the coals are raked out, right? Still, it's not allowed when it comes to the oven. So, Hachi mashma b'gemara delo mehane grifa uktima betanu, right? So look what it says, right? In the Gemara, it's implied that when it comes to the oven, right, raking it out doesn't help, doesn't really help. So what does that mean? The problem is like this, right? It's still very, very hot, so it can still cook, even though you raked it out. So for us, what would that mean? That would mean, right, even though the oven was shut off, right, before, but if it's still super, super hot, you still can't do it because it can still cook. Ovens get really hot. So, you got to take that into consideration. But as we said, right, if there's raw food there, right, or raw piece of meat, whatever, or something raw there, so then apparently we should allow that. No problem. The only problem is, when the food is like almost cooked, or whatever, half cooked, whatever. Okay, we still got more to talk about regarding this. So we'll take it step by step. Um, so he says, "V'chen katav Rav Magid." All these rabbis say the same thing. V'shem Ramban, Nim Ramban, and also the Rashba, V'chen katav Ran, the Ran also. V'chen yem midivrei kol poskim. Says all the poskim agree with this. So meaning what, right? That even though the oven is already shut down, but if it's still very, very hot, you can't put food in there to leave it for Shabbat, even though you put it before Shabbat. That's why I recommend, to my friends, I tell them, I had a friend, who recently spoke to me about this. I told him, I said, this is like not the first time I get an oven question from you. You seem to like using ovens on Shabbat. So I told him, I said, do me a favor, like get a plata, go to the store and buy a plata for God's sakes.
Plata and a timer.
I'm sorry.
Plata and a timer.
Yeah, you're right. Some people like to have it on all Shabbat, but whatever it is, right? It is what it is. But I told him, I said, like, are you in like the 21st century, sir? Get a plotter for God's sakes. Where are you? Right, So I think he finally bought one. He told me he got one. I was like, oh, Mazal Tov, thank you. Because all these things, when it comes to an oven, they're problematic. All kinds of problematic issues. As I told you, right, that oven I had in Israel had a Shabbat function. So that's why it was very handy. But American ovens usually don't have that. So what can I tell you? It is what it is. Anyway, Let's go on. So it says, Umash katuv bechol bo. What does it say in kolbo? B'shem balat shlama, name of this rabbi. The tanur garuf v'katum shareh. So he says it's allowed, right? If the oven is raked out. נראה לי שטעמו משום תנורי דידן שפיהם מן הצד, לא נפיש הבליו וכקירת דיינין עליהו. Look what he says, right? So he says, I think the reason why this rabbi allowed the oven when it's raked out, because our ovens are not like their ovens, you know, it's a different contraption, it's a different device. What's the difference, right? Because in the times of Talmud, the way the oven was, our ovens, right? The door is on the side until this day. So it says because the door is on the side, the heat is not so strong, like those ovens they had in those days. So apparently, you know, one time I saw like a picture of this, you know, diagram, whatever, about the way their ovens looked. Not like our ovens, you know, like our ovens are like square, you know, rectangular, whatever. But their ovens were like pyramid shaped. So what does that mean? As you went towards the top, it got narrower, you know, pyramid. So what do I care about that? Because when you have this shape, the heat gets even stronger. You know, because it gets like concentrated when it goes in the top because of the narrow top there. So their ovens were hotter than ours. That's pretty much what it is. So he says, apparently, right, this is the reason why this rabbi allows our ovens, because they're not so hot. So we'll see, right? What's the halacha here? We're gonna investigate into all this. So let's move on. So it says, therefore, our ovens are like more like a stove, you know, their stove, the same kind of heat, you know. Like we're gonna write right close by. Right. By the way, I think you know that our ovens are not like theirs. In other words, what I mean to say is that even the later ovens, you know, that we're talking about that they had when the door was on the side, our doors are also on the side, you know. But the thing is, since we're using gas or electricity, our ovens are super hot. So we're gonna have to see how that works, right? What's the bottom line with that? Because we have a tremendous intensity coming in, you know, from the gas and from the electricity, whatever it is, right? Heating elements. Yeah. By the way, you know, in Israel, all the ovens over there are like electric. You know, they don't have any gas ovens there. Just the stove is gas, you know, but the oven is always electric there. So, you know, I was so stupid because, you know, when we went to Israel, you know, when we met Aliyah, we bought an oven, you know, to take there, you know. Problem is, you know, that we get there and like they tell us, oh, gee, sir, you know, like we use only electric ovens here. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. So somehow they found a way, you know, to hook it up anyway, you know, to the gas, you know. So we were able to use that oven for a few good years, you know. It was actually a pretty good oven, you know, very simple one. But what do you call it? The simple ones are the best. But anyway, right? We use that oven, and you know, and the other thing is, you know, also they have a different kind of gas over there. You know, their gas is not the gas that we use here. It's a different mixture, you know. So, but anyway, we were able to get it hooked up. It was not so easy. But anyway, that's the story there. So let's move on a little bit. But he says that, but the oven that the rabbis had, in the old days, right? Talmud. It doesn't help just to empty it out, right? To break it out. Rambam says this, אבל התנור אף על פי שגרף האש או כיסה באפר, באפר, או שהסיקו בקש או בגבבה, אין machine בתוכו, right? So Rambam says, even if you raked it out, right, or you're using hay and straw, still, it's a problem. You can't put the food there. Also, it says you can't even put it on the side. Shelo bishel kol tzorko, that he didn't cook all the way. It has to be fully cooked. Or shebishel kol tzorko, or he cooked it all the way, right? And when it congeals, right, it's good for it, improves it. Since the steam is hot. It's very hot. So he doesn't divert his attention from it. Maybe he'll he'll stir the coals. I'm reminding you, right? Like we said last week, that when we're talking about stirring, we're not talking about stirring the dish now, right? We're talking about stirring the coals.
Right. It increases the heat.
Right. Even by the way, the truth is that even stirring the dish also increases the heat, but we're not talking about that right now. We're going to talk about that later, by the way. We're going to get to that, stirring the dish itself. That also can be a problem, because that increases the intensity of the cooking, when you stir it. But that's a different day, right? For a different
I know
day.
we'll talk about this later. I'm going to have questions.
Well, there's always questions, No big surprise. Okay. As the sages said, right? Lo baishan lamed. You know what that means, right? The bashful people cannot learn. Because they're too bashful to ask questions. It's not good to be bashful when it comes to this issue. Okay, so anyway, right, let's move on. Says even though it's this fire, right, is hay, right, or as we said, straw, or mechuse, or it's covered. So he says, why did they forbid to put food in the oven, right, even though it's raked out? Look what he says, right? It says because when you rake it out, you don't rake out the whole thing, nobody rakes out everything. Rather, he says what they do is they rake out the majority, not the whole thing. The atzma. Right. So it says not possible really to remove everything, all the fire. Until you won't have like one spark left in there. Why? Because it's very hot. So we're concerned that he's gonna stir, right, the coals, in order to ignite the sparks, the fire, anisharot, which are left over there in the oven. Okay, that's very interesting. So who says this? This was the Rambam, all from the Rambam. His words are very clear. Okay, great. Let's move on. Toch lashon ze itbaer lecha. So it says from this language, right? You're gonna see, you understand. That if it's something which is drying out, congealing, and it's bad for it, it's allowed. You could even put it in the oven. By the way, this has an interesting twist, this whole concept, right? Because we're saying, right, that something which is congealing, and because of that, the food is, the quality is going down. So then it's allowed to put it on any place, whether it's the oven, the stove, whatever it may be. You know what that means, practically speaking?
It's not improving the flavor, it's actually
Right. But I just want to tell you something interesting here. There's an interesting angle, right? So what happens if you heated up some water, right? You boil water for Shabbat, right? Now we have the urns, right? So we don't really use it. We don't usually put on the plata hot water. Some people do, by the way. The old timers, So anyway, right? The thing is like this. If that water that you boiled up, right? It's when it's on the fire, right? It's evaporating, isn't it? So when the water evaporates from the heat, is that good or is that bad?
I mean, it's bad.
It's bad, because it's disappearing, right? You're losing it. Like, the whole purpose is, right? Going up in smoke, as they say, right? So therefore, right, it's considered to be, when it comes to hot water, it's considered to be that it's bad. So therefore you could put it on even like a open flame, right? Once you boiled it. Because it's bad. That's what comes out of this concept. It's one of the things that, right, emanates from it. Okay. Anyway, so therefore the Shulchan Aruch allows that, right? When it comes to hot water, it was already cooked before Shabbat. The Gra is machmir about that, but we don't paskin like that. Anyway, let's get back to our issue. כן כתב רבינו ירוחם, that's what's in ירוחם, בחלק ג' וכן נראה מדברי הריף והראש, right? That's what comes out from Rif and Rosh. Gabe kopach, right? Also the kopach, right? As we said, the kopach is like a mini stove, right? Only one place instead of two. וכבר כתבתי לעיל, so he says, I already wrote above, right? דכל מידי דשארה לשהויה בקירה, whatever you're allowed to place on the stove, שאינה גרופה או כלומה, which is not raked out, שרה לשהויה בתנור לדעת כמה פוסקים. Also, you're allowed to put in the oven as well, according to some authorities. אפילו החולקים בזה, he says, even the ones that argue with this, בעניין קידרה חייתה, when it comes to, right, raw food, modu b'mistamik v'ralo. But when it comes to something which is, as we said, right, and congeals, and it's bad for it, there they admit that's the halacha. So he says, because they're not going to come to stir it up, because it's bad for it, right? Why would I want to stir the coals? It's evaporating even more, right? Congealing even more. Who wants that? I don't want that. On the other hand, right, let's say if you have a soup, and sometimes when you have like a fresh cooked soup, right, what happens is that it's good for it to dry out a little bit, the flavor gets stronger, right? You know that. I don't have to teach you. So because of that's considered to be that's good for it, so in a case like that, it may be good. Depends on the case, right? It gets a stronger flavor.
Yeah,
the more you
I would
cook
agree
it.
with that, but in most cases, I'm worried about things drying out.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. You got to make it's like a judgment call, with that, you got to make a judgment call. Is it good or is it bad? What about if it's a doubt? So apparently you can be lenient, because all this is rabbinical. It's not from the Torah, these rules. So you can be lenient with that. Okay, great. So let's move on. Tanu Pirish Rashi, right? So Rashi explains, right, the structure of their oven, as I told you, right? They have like a pyramid oven those days. So he says, because it's a pyramid shape, right? And it's narrow on the top, so the heat gets like very intense there. It gets hotter. It's going to be hotter than your stove, because as we said, right, the stove doesn't get that hot for two reasons. One is because it has like holes, in the top. The other reason is because it's not that shape, right? It's a rectangle shape. Okay, so let's move on. Talmud Adenapi Shechavle, so it's very hot. Ukadivri Aran, like the Ran said, Katab Hashem Rach, he said the name of the Rach, the Matnitin Betanur Shel Nachtomin. So he says the Mishnah is talking about the so he says it's talking about an oven of a baker's oven, right? Which probably is hotter, right? As you would imagine. It's even hotter. ותנור של נחתומים מפורש בלא יחפור. So it says the baker's oven is explained, right? Where? בעל בתרא, כ' עמוד ב', אבל תנור דידן כקירה. So it says, but our ovens are not like that, right? In other words, they're not so hot like that. So that's also another way of explaining it, right? Either way, it comes out, our ovens are not so hot like their ovens were. Whether because it's the shape of it, or whether it's because right, it was a professional oven for a baker. Okay. So it goes on. Kolbo says like this. So it says these stoves of ours, שקוראים hornilash, right? That's what they call it. שמסיקים אותם מבפנים. So what they do is, right, the heat comes from inside. So meaning what? The fuel, right, is inside the box. So he says, then what we do is we rake it out, all the coals, right? Not all, but some of it, whatever. Clean pot, and then we put bread in there. Look what happens, right? So they remove the coals, and then they put the bread. Or panadash, right? Or some kind of a other dish, whatever. Or kasula, right? Kasula. So he says, since they already raked it out, totally raked it out. And there's a lot of room in there inside, right? A lot of hollow space there, right? More than you need to place a pot there. So therefore, he says they're considered to be our stoves are like their stoves. Same thing. In other words, the heat is less. That's what it says in this rabbi. Where is this? In Gilayon, in Babata. The matnitin, the tanur shenachtomin. Right. He also says, right, that the Mishnah is talking about a professional oven. Baker's oven. But he says our ovens though, right? They're not so hot like that, so we consider it like more like a stove in terms of the intensity, right? Okay, very good. And there's still a lot more. We're not going to finish this tonight, but we're going somewhere. We're going somewhere. Okay. So maybe we should look in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what we can do. So I'll review what we did last time, and we'll continue from there. So it says right like this: Kira shehi asuya kekdera. If the stove is made right, as we said, like a box, the shofatin al piya kdera lemala, and what we do is right, we put the pot on top of it in the hole. It's got two holes for two pots. Right? So if it was lit with olive pits, right, something like that. Right, which comes from the olives, as we said, or be'etzim, right, or with wood. So you're not allowed to put a dish on that, right? To put it to keep it there for Shabbat. Unless it's fully cooked, that's something else, right? If it's fully cooked, same thing by us, by the way, something which is fully cooked, you can put it on open flame. It's not really a problem. As I said, right, personally, I don't like to deal with stoves anymore, on Shabbat. I use the plata and that's it, right? I don't touch the stove on Shabbat. But in the old days, we used to use it, in my younger days, we used to use the stove. We would put a plata, that blech on top of it, whatever they call it, right? That metal plate. By the way, I still have one in my kitchen, from the old days. When I was here in my younger days, I went to Israel, right? And I came back, it was still here. So I still have it, So I use it, I keep it like as a backup, just in case, right? Whatever. I need something. You never know. Anyway, so unless it was fully cooked, and also it has to be right, congealing and bad. Congealing and bad. So then we're not concerned, right? He's going to stir the coals. So as I mentioned last week, just to reiterate, our situation is not really exactly this situation because, as we said, right, our plata or our stove is going to be like on a constant heat, so you don't need to stir anything. There's nothing to stir there. So according to that opinion, you could just you don't even need one really. You don't need a blech. You don't need a plate. So therefore, if a person has no choice, you know what I mean, he could just use the open flame because of that, because that's really the correct way of looking at it. That our situation is not theirs. It's not the same thing. Okay, then. But the custom is to be stringent with that. We try to be stringent as much as we can. If there's no choice, there's no choice. Or shaya chai, right? All the other option could be that it was raw, right? The food. It wasn't cooked at all, right? So since it's raw, he's not going to eat it tonight, right? He's going to eat tomorrow. So then it can cook all night, right? Without any stirring. You don't need to stir it. There's no purpose. But if it was cooked a little bit, but not all the way, right? Right? Or let's say it was cooked all the way, but it's still good. It congeals. It's good. So there we're concerned that he's gonna stir. Right? So therefore you cannot leave it there. Unless garaf, right? Unless you rake out the coals, as we said, right? That means you're removing all the coals. That's what he says. Everything. Oh, katam, right? Or he, as we said, right, covered it with ashes. That reduces the heat. As we said, right? Another option is to put like a raw piece of something there. And mutar right? It's allowed as if like the whole thing was raw. So therefore, why is that? Because by way of this, he saves it for tomorrow, basically. Right? He doesn't want to eat it tonight. So as you remember last week, we said that applies even to fish and vegetables that are raw, not only meat. Okay. Even though there's another opinion there, right? But apparently he paskins like the lenient opinion.
That was from the Rambam, right?
I think so. If I remember, yeah, if I remember correctly. So that's good. Let's move on. Yeah, you're right. So anyway, so it says even if it's not raked out or covered, right? But you can put something on the side, right? It's not so hot there. It's not the way of cooking like that. So put it on the side. Right outside of it. Another solution is, as we said, if he used straw, right, or hay, that's also no problem. Even though he didn't remove it, right, you can still use that. Okay, great. So we got a couple more minutes. Let's continue with the Ramah here. So it says, Hagash, tekirot amatimot, right? We saw this in Bet Yosef, right? Where you have two stoves, one right next to the other, like juxtaposed, And there's between them, there's like as we said, right, clay wall. One is raked out, and the other one's not raked out. So you're allowed to put the dish on top of the one that's raked out. Even though it adds heat, the other one. When it's not raked out. So, but apparently, right, from this language, what do you learn? That if there is no wall between them, right, of clay, then it's not allowed to do this. So why is that? Because then it would really get very, very hot, It's like, you didn't rake it out. Since they're juxtaposed one to the other, right? Okay, great. So what else we got here? So now he talks about the oven, right? But when it comes to the oven, right? Right? Even if it was used with they lit it with straw, right, and hay, you're not allowed to even put next to it something. Even if it's raked out. So we already said, right, that's with their ovens, right? Says Ramah, calls there, she had Ramah reminds you, right? We just learned in Bet Yosef, which is what? That's only if it's Yatzoledet. But if it's not, so we said it's okay, right? You can do that. All the more so you cannot put in right on top of the oven or inside the oven, right? It's even hotter. The kupach, what about kupach, right? The single one, right? It's only one place there. If it was done with straw or hay, kekira, so then it's like a stove, right? Same level of heat, whatever. Begefet or betzim, right? So when it comes to right olive pits, right, or wood, katana, it's like so there it's going to be like the oven, right? Not like the stove. So why is that? Because as we said, right, this thing is a little bit hotter than the stove, and it's a little bit colder than the oven, right? It's like in the middle, So that's why we have like a split decision over here when it comes to this thing. Today we don't have this contraption, so we don't really have to worry about it anyway. Anyway, that's the story there. So says the Ramah, right? But he says our ovens are like a stove, right? As we said, they're not so hot like their ovens. Okay, so we'll stop there. That's great. We finished this piece over here. So next time we'll continue with the next pieces. There's still more to do here. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazaku Baruch, Laila Tov, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
God bless.